Okay, so there's something very unique and something very special about the month of Iyar in that the counting of Sfirat Omer, it's a mitzvah that we do. It's a mitzvah that we do beginning in the month of Nisan, ending in the month of Sivan, but it spans the entirety of Chodesh Iyar, the month of Iyar. So when it comes to the month of Iyar, every single day of the month is involved in this mitzvah. Now, the thing that's particularly special about this, because every day we do lots of mitzvahs, right? What is it about this mitzvah that makes this month so special? We all, are keeping 600, well, not quite 613, but there are hundreds of mitzvahs that we're all doing. Anybody who's living a Torah observant life knows that from the second we open our eyes until we fall asleep at night, we're doing mitzvahs all day. So what is it about this mitzvah that's so special that this month has this mitzvah every day? What about all the others? The thing that's special about this mitzvah is, or the thing that about this mitzvah, let's say, that makes this month special, is that when we do a mitzvah, whatever part of the world is involved in the mitzvah.
The sound isn't on. They said the sound isn't on.
Oh.
Recording in progress.
Do you hear me now? Is the audio working?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, thank
Great.
you.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Okay, so very brief recap. The month of Iyar is unique in that every single day of the month is involved in the mitzvah Sfirat Omer. We count the Omer every day. But to really appreciate what it is that makes that so special, or what it is about this mitzvah that makes the month so unique and special when we're doing hundreds of mitzvahs every single day, is that the effect of this mitzvah specifically, right? So anything that's involved in a mitzvah, when we light Shabbos candles, the oil or wax or paraffin that's involved in the candle gets elevated, and it has the infinity of Hashem integrated into it, the material that's used for the wick, the cotton, whatever it is, the match is elevated, the energy that we use to strike the match and light the candles is elevated, the food that we ate from which we got that energy is elevated, the money that we used to purchase the candles as well as the work we did to get the money, everything that's involved in a mitzvah is elevated. But certainly the things that are part of the mitzvah themselves, when we learn Torah, in addition to whatever happens to us internally, the pages, the ink, anything that's involved in a mitzvah becomes elevated. The mitzvah of Sfirat Omer, what is it that we're doing? We are counting time. We are doing a mitzvah that involves the day. So when we count the Omer today, we are doing a mitzvah with the time itself. This means that every time we count Sfirat Omer, the day itself, the time, right? If we think about what is a day, what is time? Time is a layer of, let's say, the operating system, the framework that we exist inside of. We exist inside of time. Our experience is defined by time. Every part of our lives is defined by time because it happens within time. Hashem designed and created us to exist inside of time and space. So time and space are the operating system inside of which we are operating. They're the framework inside of which we exist. They're the framework inside of which the universe exists. And when we count the Omer, we are doing a mitzvah with the time itself. So every time the Omer is counted, the 24 hours and the minutes inside of those hours and the seconds and the moments that those seconds are made up of are elevated. They have the infinity of Hashem integrated into them, so that not only are we integrating divinity, integrating the infinity of Hashem into our life and into parts of our life. We're integrating it into the framework inside of which we exist, we operate, the universe exists. So the month of Iyar is a month, it's a very, very special and unique period of time because the entirety of this month is, let's say for the entirety of this month, we exist, the universe exists inside of a framework, in an operating system that is elevated through this mitzvah, that has the infinity of Hashem integrated into it through this mitzvah. So for this entire month, we exist inside of a different kind of time, which is going to translate into, obviously, the potential that we have to achieve, to grow, to make a difference, etc. All of these things are, our potential is going to be different in this month because we're operating in time that's elevated through a mitzvah. So now let's talk about Sfiras HaOmer, about this mitzvah, the specifics of this mitzvah that's elevating every single moment of this month. So what exactly is Sfiras HaOmer? Sfiras HaOmer, there's a mitzvah, it says in the Torah, Sfartem lachem mimachoras HaShabbos, and you will count for yourselves from the day after the first day of Pesach, from when we bring the Korban Omer. Korban Omer is a sacrifice that's brought on Pesach. And then it says, and you will count 7 weeks of 7 days, i.e. 49 days. On the 50th day will be Shavuos. So, counting Sfira is a preparation for Shavuos. Counting the Omer is also a preparation for receiving the Torah. That's what happened on the original Shavuos. That's what happened when we reached Mount Sinai on Shavuos. We got the Torah, and there's actually a medrash that says that when we counted the Omer that first year as we were leaving Egypt, on the way out of Egypt, a medrash says that part of what the counting was us anticipating, looking forward to receiving the Torah on Mount Sinai. When you find out that something really exciting is going to happen in the near future, what do? You make a calendar and you cross off the days, you count down the days, and so that's what we're doing. So the Omer, counting the Omer, this mitzvah that we're doing that elevates and changes the nature of time for the entirety of this month, this mitzvah is a preparation for Shavuos and a preparation for the Torah, for receiving the Torah. Now, Shavuos and Matan Torah go hand in hand, but they're not the same thing. And we're going to talk about an entire message in Shavuos that has nothing to do with the Torah per se. And we're going to see how this is a preparation for both, and then what that means to us today, because ultimately, learning Torah is important because it's learning Torah and it's a mitzvah, and the Torah contains the infinity of Hashem inside of it. But it's also important when we learn Torah to understand that Torah, the word Torah means instruction. This is instruction to us. So this mitzvah and whatever the Torah says about this mitzvah has messages for us today, every single one of us. And on one hand, the message is the same to all of us, broadly. And at the same time, and this is going to actually be part of the message itself, as we're going to see, the way that message translates specifically in detail is going to be different for each of us, because exactly what that means for each of us is going to be different, because we're different people with different circumstances on different journeys. So we're going to talk about what Shavuos is, what the Torah is and the receiving of the Torah is, what the mitzvah of Sfiras HaOmer is, or what the meaning of it is, or a meaning of it is, and how that's a preparation for Shavuos and for Matan Torah, and what that means to us. So when I say that there's something about Shavuos that is completely independent of the receiving of the Torah, what does that mean? Or what am I talking about? Because if you ask anyone probably what's Shavuos about, Shavuos is about, it's when we receive the Torah, which is true. But that's not what Shavuos is, right? Pesach is primarily, the theme of Pesach, according to Torah, is the festival of celebrating the Exodus. It's the festival of our liberation. It's a time of liberation, and that's what we're commemorating and celebrating. Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, each of them has something that it's about. Shavuos has something that it's about too, but it's not actually about the giving of the Torah primarily. They happen to coincide. Shavuos happens. The Torah happened to have been given on Shavuos, happened to have been given, obviously, by divine providence, etc. And there's a lot to the fact that that was engineered that way. But intrinsically, the Yom Tov of Shavuos is not about the giving of the Torah. The thing that Shavuos has about it that's unique, really, the big thing is, that's intrinsic to the holiday of Shavuos, is a very unique korban, a sacrifice that was brought once a year, only on Shavuos, the Shtei Alachim, these two loaves. Now, this korban was brought once a year, and there's something that's extremely unique, that's a very big deal, actually, very significant, that was unique to this sacrifice. And that is that this korban was chametz. Right? When we in Musaf, when we daven in Musaf, when we talk about all the different sacrifices, and we say, and then each sacrifice that had this amount of flour that was brought in a meal offering, and this amount of wine that was poured, etc. When we talk about all these menachos, a korban mincha, a meal offering, an offering of flour, those were all matzah. Those were all 100% kosher lePesach. Every korban mincha, it was bread technically, but it was unleavened bread. They were all kosher lePesach. There's only one time a year that chametz was offered as a sacrifice in the Mishkan, in the Beis Hamikdash, and that was on Shavuos. Which maybe seems a little bit odd, that we're coming from Pesach, where we had this huge aversion to chametz, and we all know what the message, and we're going to talk about that briefly. What is this? What does chametz represent, and why we have such a strong aversion to it on Pesach? And then how do we go from covering everything in foil? You have the photos, the memes that go around every year, making fun of how the insanity of covering things in foil. It's a good time. Maybe the conspiracy theorists feel comfortable because they can wear tinfoil hats and it fits in with everything else. We go so crazy and people buy new pots and pans and go this is the only mitzvah where there's no such thing as too extreme. There's no such thing as too much. Because there is halachically, in halacha, now when I say halacha, I don't mean it's an obligation, but in the books of halacha, in the text of halacha, there is a concept of almost, not quite because by definition it's not overboard, but almost there is this idea that going overboard on Pesach is a positive, is a good thing. To the extent that we can, and obviously if it becomes overboard, then that means it's not a good thing anymore if it becomes overboard for us. But in general, it's not necessarily a positive or a virtue to do things more than necessary. When it comes to Pesach, there is a thing, and there's a lot of meaning to it, and reasons why, very important reasons why. But how is it that we go from going so crazy and overboard, and halacha sort of acknowledging and, let's say, maybe appreciating the idea of going overboard on Pesach, in terms of eliminating any possibility of there being even room for doubt that maybe there's a possibility of chametz having existed. And then 7 weeks later, we're actually bringing chametz into the Mishkan, into the Beis Hamikdash. Seems a little strange. And it is a little strange. And on one hand, it's kind of counterintuitive and doesn't seem to make sense. In fact, there is a scriptural prohibition, an Isur D'Oraisa, explicit in the Torah, in the Psukim, that says, K'chol sa'or v'chol dvash lo yisaktiru. You are not allowed to offer chametz, sa'or meaning chametz, on the Mizbeach. Which is why the Shtei Alechem had to be offered up. It couldn't go near the Mizbeach because, chametz is prohibited on the Mizbeach. But the fact that chametz is prohibited on the Mizbeach kind of makes sense in light of the theme of Pesach. So why are we finding a way that we're going to, bring chametz even though we don't put it on the Mizbeach, etc.? The question is, what's up with that? And the answer is that this is what the journey of Sfiras HaOmer is about. So if we take a look at the Korban Omer, which was a sacrifice that's brought on Pesach at the start of this, right? Remember that Sfiras HaOmer, the counting of the Omer, is called the counting of the Omer because we're counting from the Omer sacrifice on Pesach down to the holiday of Shavuos and the Shtei Alechem sacrifice. The Korban Omer is also unique. It's not the only one, it's one of two, but it's one of only two sacrifices that were brought specifically from barley. In general, all the meal offerings, there was a lot of flour in the Beis HaMikdash and the Mishkan, there were lots of meal offerings. Every sacrifice had meal offerings that came along with it, there was flour everywhere, but it was all wheat flour. There were only two sacrifices that were made out of barley. One is the Korban of the Sota, and the other one is the Korban Omer. And it says, the Chazal talk about the fact that the reason or the idea of bringing a sacrifice made out of barley rather than wheat is that in general wheat is considered to be human food as opposed to barley was always perceived as being a lower class grain, and barley was fed to animals, wheat was fed to people. So the sacrifice that we bring immediately after the exodus from Egypt is a sacrifice that we're bringing from barley, which is considered halachically to be animal food. Why is that? The reason that sacrifice was brought from barley, which is animal food, is because at that time, we were, let's say, not in a very good state. We were, for all intents and purposes, let's say, the most animalistic versions of ourselves that it's possible to be. Which makes sense. Remember, it says that we said in the Haggadah at the Pesach Seder, when we talk about Hashem taking us out, Hashem says, Ani v'lo shliach, ani v'lo malach. There was no messenger in the world, there was no angel, there was nothing that existed in any spiritual realm that had the strength and the groundedness to be able to come into the circumstances that we were in Egypt without becoming corrupted itself. There's only one entity that exists that could have gone into those circumstances and made it back out without becoming corrupted, and that's Hashem himself. So Hashem had to take us out. So we were in circumstances of the most extreme spiritual corruption possible. And we, to a substantial degree, adapted and were, let's say, somewhat assimilated to those circumstances, and we ourselves were, let's say, in a very spiritually depraved state at that time. And so we were the most animalistic versions of ourselves, and so the sacrifice that's brought on that day is made out of animal food, which is consistent thematically with the state that we were in. And another thing that really we see clearly that aligns with this is that it says, Ki borach ha'am. Paro saw that we ran away. We ran away from Egypt. Why did we run away? Paro literally came and begged Moshe to take the Jews out of Egypt. He was literally begging. When someone's begging you to do something that you want to do, there's nothing to be scared of. What did we have to run? It's not like Paro was, there was any grounds for being afraid of Paro. The reason that we ran was because we were afraid of being close to Egypt, but not because we were afraid of Paro, we were afraid of ourselves. We had just come out of the most spiritually corrupt circumstances in the world. We ourselves were in a, let's say, equivalently spiritually corrupt state. So as long as we were there, in proximity to that, there was a very high risk of us just wanting to turn around and go back. For us to just stay there would be like, let's say an addict who's in recovery hanging out around the, whatever it is that they've struggled with. It's just simply and obviously a bad idea. So we ran. So the sacrifice on Pesach, the Korban Omer, is made out of barley, which is animal food, because that represents the state that we were in, which was the most animalistic version of ourselves. Which is why we had to run, because we didn't want to be at risk because of that state. And then we went on this 7-week journey, and this is what we're going to talk about now. So what's the theme of Pesach is getting rid of chametz, right? Why is it that even that halacha acknowledges, halacha texts and conversations over the centuries, is not just a modern thing, acknowledge this idea of really being a little bit more extreme than we are with anything else when it comes to Pesach? And the reason is, it's based on a Gemara. There's a Gemara that talks about a prayer that someone said, his name was Rav Alexandri, and he says when he finished Talmud Shemona Esrei, he would add his own personal private prayer, and he would say, Hashem, Master of the universe, you know that our desire is to do your will. Right, now Rav Alexandri was no fool. He knew that every single one of us, if we are going to stand in front of the mirror and take a brutally honest inventory of ourselves, every single one of us is going to be able to find, if we dig deep enough, at least one detail somewhere that doesn't exactly seem to fit with Hashem's will. So how does that work? If he says that our will is to do your will, we want to do your will. So he continues and he says, who is it that gets in the way? If our will is to do your will, and Hashem knows that we don't always do his will, what gets in the way? He says, the leaven, the chametz. What do you mean the chametz gets in the way? What does that mean? So Rashi says the chametz is a metaphor for the Yetzer Hara, for the evil inclination, for the negative tendencies that we have. And the reason that Rabbi Alexandri uses chametz as a metaphor for the Yetzer Hara, for, let's say, the source of everything negative that we do, is because chametz is actually literally a perfect metaphor for that. What is chametz? If you take let's say, I don't know what the proportions need to be, but you take a pound of flour and however much water you need, is appropriate to put with that much flour, and you mix it together until you have a consistent, homogeneous dough, and you divide that dough into 2 halves, and you weigh them, and they each weigh the same exact amount. One of them you roll out into matzah, thin, quickly, you bake it. The other one you let it sit, you give it time to rise. Maybe it sours a little, it starts to rise, and then once it rises, you bake it. If you weigh those 2 loaves of bread, the matzah and the chametz, they're going to have very different mass. They're going to show up differently on the scale. The chametz is going to weigh more. How does the chametz weigh more? They weighed the same thing when you measured them and separated them. The reason that the chametz weighs more is very simple. And it's the same as the reason that we all choose to eat chametz all year round instead of matzah. And that's because chametz is soft and fluffy, and it's a lot more pleasant to eat most of the time for most people. Right? How did it get soft and fluffy? Very simple. Why? The reason, in order to get chametz, if you want to get chametz efficiently and quickly, you want to add in either a sourdough or some yeast or something. Why? Because the yeast are a living microorganism, and you mix them into the dough, they metabolize some of the carbohydrates, and when they break down and digest the carbohydrates that are in the flour, in the bread, and this is why adding some sugar to the dough, especially at the beginning, can really help get things moving. Because, as we all know, sugar provides more energy more readily and rapidly than flour does. So you put in a bit of sugar, that really gets the microorganisms going, they break it down to release energy the same way that our cells do. And the byproduct when they break it down is that they give off carbon dioxide gas, which is why if you do at the beginning of a bread or challah recipe and you bloom the yeast at the beginning, you see it becomes bubbly and fluffy. One of the reasons to do that at the beginning specifically is to make sure that the yeast that you're putting in is alive and functional. You make a whole challah recipe and you put your yeast and you mix it and you knead it, and then it turns out that the yeast was dead. You've wasted a lot of time and effort and ingredients. You bloom the yeast at the beginning and you can see, oh, it's bubbling, it's alive, it's doing its job. You know you have yeast that's alive and it's metabolizing, creating this carbon dioxide gas. So you put the yeast or the sourdough into the dough mixture, and what it does is it breaks down some of the carbohydrates and it releases air, gas inside the dough. As this continues to happen, the dough gets these little pockets of air inside. And it's interesting, I remember the first time we did this as an experiment in high school, and it was counterintuitive, and it took a while for me to realize that it makes sense, and the way it works, if you take a balloon, and you just, an empty balloon, and you put it on a scale, on a balance, a sensitive electronic balance, and you get, or any kind, but it's sensitive and accurate, you'll get a weight. You blow the balloon up, the exact same balloon, tie a knot, and then put it back on the balance. It's going to weigh more. Why? Because the balloon now contains air inside, and the mass of the balloon includes both the mass of the material of the balloon and the mass of the air that's inside. Same thing with the bread. This bread has now been filled up with little pockets of space that is empty of dough. It just has air inside. As far as the dough is concerned, it's empty space. The bread therefore becomes bigger. Why? Because it's incorporated air inside, just like when you blow up a balloon, it's the same thing. It weighs more because the mass of the air now works as part of the mass of the bread. It's softer and fluffier because it has inflated its own size with empty spaces. That dough, the number of molecules of flour in the chametz dough are the same as they are in the matzah. In fact, they're probably even a little fewer because some of them got metabolized by the yeast, whatever made it rise. But let's leave that aside. If you would take the chametz, let's say, and squeeze out all of the air until it's as dense as matzah, it would weigh the same thing again, because as far as the dough is concerned, it's the same amount. But the bread does weigh more. Why? Because this bread is not just made up of dough. This loaf of chametz stick of bread is made up of dough and a lot of empty spaces that have air inside. So yes, not technically empty, but empty of dough, empty of flour. And what this represents is every one of us, matzah, what's the primary point of value? What's the primary value in bread, nutritionally? Now this could get controversial depending on who you ask, etc. But the primary reason that people are eating bread, if they're eating it to satiate themselves, let's say, or as a food rather than just for pleasure, is for the dough, for the carbohydrates, for the energy that it contains. The energy that is contained in that chametz loaf is exactly the same as the energy that's contained in the matzah that was the other half of the same batch of dough. There are two halves, same amount of flour, same amount of energy. And that energy is the most important thing. That's the real point of it, right? Every single one of us has things that make us valuable, which is why Hashem created every one of us. Every one of us has our intrinsic divine value that we have as a creation of Hashem and as someone that has a spark of the infinity of Hashem inside of us. Every one of us has things that the world needs from us. We have gifts and talents and yes, challenges, and all of these things come together to make us exactly who we're supposed to be in order to give the universe something that it needs, to give Hashem something that he needs. And that is primarily who we are. That's like the dough. Now, part of the human condition is that we tend to mix into those things also these empty pockets that are just full of, hot air of nothing. And then our perception and our sense of self becomes inflated because it's made up in large part of empty space that actually has no point of true, actual, objective value. Not that we don't, but the things that we add in to create this new persona or this new sense of self do have no value. They get mixed in and it makes this whole thing into something that is bigger and larger and weighs more because it has all of this empty, worthless space mixed into it, just like matzah that rises and turns into bread, into chametz. And so this is why Rabbi Alexander uses chametz as a metaphor for the source of everything bad. If we had nothing that was neutral or negative, nothing that wasn't truly part of who we are mixed into our perception of ourselves, and we had an absolutely 100% precisely, accurately informed sense of self and perception of ourselves as exactly who and what we are, the way Hashem created us, for exactly the reasons that Hashem created us, we would all behave perfectly. And that's what he says. You know that our will is to do your will. So who gets in the way? What gets in the way? The reason that we all, if we're going to be brutally honest in front of the mirror, we're going to find something in ourselves that's not perfect, is because we also have within us this leaven in the dough, this part of the human condition that makes us mix emptiness and things that don't have value, that don't have true value or meaning, into our sense of self, into the way we perceive ourselves. That makes us larger. It dilutes the purity of the value and the meaning. And that's the source of everything negative. So that's why he says, we want to do your will. Who gets in the way? The leaven in the dough, the chametz. So chametz represents this sense, this perception, this sense of self. Let's say in this sense, a focus on self. Let's call it that. And if it's the source of everything negative, it makes sense that we're going to be super strict and really be brutal in our process of eliminating it. If it's the source of everything negative. The question then is, how on earth does it make sense that the Torah is telling us to bring this into the Mishkan as an offering, to bring chametz into the Mishkan as an offering at the end of the 7 weeks into the Beis HaMikdash? And the answer is that this is the whole point of Sfiras HaOmer. Sfiras HaOmer is a process of, I'm like having a hard time saying it because of the fact that it's become this cliche term, and it feels cheesy. But the reason a lot of cliches became cliches because they're true and they're effective terms, and it just can become unpleasant to use them as a result. But it is personal development. We are developing ourselves, and every night after we count Sfira, there's a tefillah we say where we talk about Hashem helping us to uplift and elevate and clarify and purify a certain very specific character trait that we have within ourselves. And the idea of Sfiras HaOmer of this part of Sfiras HaOmer is that yes, every one of us starts this journey as as an animal. And when I say animal, I don't mean non-human, but as a human animal. Let's say as a Homo sapiens animal. That's why the carbonara is made out of barley, which is animal food. And that's the reason we had to run, because we were in a spiritual state in which we were at very high risk of going back. Every one of us starts there, and Hashem designed us to start there. We're not supposed to stay there, though. And what does it look like? What does the process of not staying there look like? It doesn't look like pretending that that's not who we really are, because that doesn't change anything, and it doesn't hold up for very long. And it doesn't consist of running away from it, because running away doesn't change anything either. And you can run away for maybe a little bit longer than you can deny, but eventually you're going to run out of breath and be exhausted from running and not be able to run anymore, and then it's going to catch up. Running away, and more importantly, that's not the point. If Hashem wanted us to just not be around the negativity, He could have just not created it. Hashem created that negativity within us and within the world because He wants us to elevate it, to work with it. That's the idea of Dir B'Tachtonim. That's the whole point of the existence of the universe, is the process of working with the negative to make it gradually less negative and more positive. That's the point. Sfiras HaOmer is about acknowledging and accepting the fact that we have these negative things within us, and that's exactly the way it's supposed to be. It's not on us, and it's not wrong. It's on Hashem, which means it's not wrong, right? Hashem designed us this way intentionally because Hashem wanted us to have this opportunity to go on a journey of working with those negative character traits and looking them in the eye, naming them. Every day in Sfiras HaOmer, we name a characteristic. Look at those negative traits, accept them, acknowledge them, understand that the fact that they exist is not wrong, it's because Hashem put them there. And once we understand that, it becomes very clear that the better we understand them, the more willing we are to acknowledge and accept and name them, and then address them and work on them, the better the chance we have of actually transforming them. And every single aspect of our personalities has the ability to go in multiple directions. right? A person who, let's say, is very stubborn or extremely persistent, let's say, because of the baggage that comes with the word stubborn, a person can be extremely persistent for negative things and extremely persistent for positive things. Now, just the fine print, because, it might seem like, well, even extremely persistent for positive things, there's a time and a place when it's like, okay, that's enough, you stop driving me crazy now. Extremely persistent doesn't have to mean tactless. Extremely persistent means not giving up. A person can be extremely persistent in a way that is very thoughtful and sensitive and tactful. It's just that they don't give up. And they're trying new things and doing things in ways that are novel and maybe hopefully going to have a better chance of being effective. It doesn't mean being annoying. It just means not giving up. A person can also not give up and be persistent and stubborn about the worst things. Being extremely persistent is neutral. It's just a character trait. Question is, what do you apply? How is it applied? And that's true of every character trait. Kindness can be applied positively or negatively. Being strict and judgmental or strict and demanding can be applied positively or negatively. The character traits themselves are agnostic. They don't really care, it doesn't matter. And so the journey of Sfiras HaOmer is a journey of acknowledging these negative character traits, these things that aren't the way they should be, understand and accept that Hashem put them here for a reason, so that we could do exactly this, which is name them, look them in the eye, be aware of them, and then work to make them into what they should be, into the better version of themselves. And we do this one trait at a time. Every single day of Sfira, we name a different character trait. And then at the end of Sfiras HaOmer, every single one of us who started out at the Exodus from Egypt as this most animalistic Homo sapiens animal version of ourselves, which is why the Korban Omer is brought from barley, from animal food, if we spend those 7 weeks on the way to Har Sinai looking, accepting, acknowledging these negative character traits, naming them, and then working to address them individually one at a time, and we put in that work, then 7 weeks later, once we're done that and we come to Har Sinai, we come to Shavuos, all of those character traits, all of those things that make us who we are, our personal chometz, it's still a sense of self, but it's now a sense of self that has been worked on, that has been developed, that has been clarified, that has been cleansed, and now our sense of self is something that we can very proudly bring into the Mishkan, bring into the Beis HaMikdash, and offer up as a sacrifice to Hashem. That's the whole point. If the point of Chometz was just to... we're going to have to do a lot of fine print. If I go there, I'm going to have time, so I'm going to leave it at that. But that's the whole idea here. Right now, this journey of Shavuos is a preparation, of Sfiras HaOmer is a preparation for two things. It's a preparation for Shavuos, because when we acknowledge the fact that we have things that are imperfect and we're, have the courage to look them in the eye and name them and then do what we need to do to actually address them, we become someone whose actual chometz can come in as a sacrifice to Hashem. And we also become someone who is now in a state to be spiritually receptive to the Torah. We came to Har Sinai and received the Torah on Shavuos. The Torah is, the body of Torah is information, it's ideas. But the soul, the thing that's inside of those ideas, is Hashem himself. The first word of the Ten Commandments of Aseret HaDibros is Anochi, which means I, but it's a very unconventional choice of words for I. I would usually be Ani. Why Anochi? So it says in the Talmud that this is an acronym. Anochi is an acronym for Anon Nafshik Ksavos Yehovah. Hashem says, I have written and placed myself inside these words. When we learn a posuk in Chumash, when we learn a halacha, we learn anything that's a part of Torah, as that knowledge becomes stored inside of the neurons in our brains, which it obviously does, because if we didn't know it yesterday and we know it now, that piece of information is physically stored inside our neurons. That means that when we study Torah, Hashem is physically stored inside the nerve cells, the cells in our brains, which is an incredible thing. This is what's so special and unique about Torah. The more we have worked to align our personality and our personal character traits with the way that they're supposed to be, rather than the chometz version of ourselves, the better a position we're going to be to really accept and internalize the Torah and Shavuos. This is why the counting of the Omer is a preparation. It's a journey of preparation from that Homo sapiens animal that just came out of Egypt and brings a sacrifice of barley, of animal food, to a human being in an aligned state that can bring their own personal chametz as an offering to Hashem, and is now in a state to be receptive to the Torah. This journey, this idea, thank you, nice to see you. This journey of self-development is, this is what our lives are about always, every day of our lives. This is just the idea being emphasized and brought to the forefront during Sfiras HaOmer. And remember that this is a mitzvah that is integrated into the time itself for this month. So this month of Iyar, every moment of time is associated with this journey. And there are just a few points that I want to really emphasize here, because these points cannot be emphasized enough. But you know what? To do that very briefly, what's the actual time? We're getting different times here. Okay.
11:27.
Okay, we've got 3 minutes. The mitzvah of counting the Omer, it says in the Pasuk, "Usfartem lachem," and you shall count for yourselves. It's individual. The ramifications of this are very, again, it seems a bit extreme and strange, but let's say it's Monday and it's the 10th day of the Omer, and that's the way it works out this year, let's say. And someone who is in New York City departs New York City and flies to Australia on Monday, the 10th day of the Omer. They go through one night, but because when they're traveling overnight, they're crossing the date line, and when they cross the date line, time jumps ahead 24 hours. They leave here Monday, and let's say 24 hours later, give or take, they arrive on Wednesday in Australia, but it's only been one night. Everyone in Australia is now on the 12th day of the Omer. If Monday was 10, Tuesday's 11, Wednesday was 12. But if you travel from here to Australia and you counted 10 on Monday, you passed through one night, it's now the 11th day of the Omer. It's the next day, it's the 11th day. It's Wednesday and everyone else is counting 12 flat because they started a day earlier. But the Pasuk says, and you shall count for yourself. And because the holiday of Shavuos is not defined by a date on the calendar, it's defined by the 50th day of the Omer. And that's the reason that actually in the time of the Beis Hamikdash, when the months are determined by witnesses, and any given month could be 29 or 30 days, Shavuos actually can change. Shavuos can be the 5th, 6th, or 7th of Sivan, depending on the length of the months of Nisan and Iyar. So Shavuos is determined by every one of us, our own journey through 50 days of time. If I traveled across the date line and I landed in a place where now my journey of time is different to theirs, you actually, if you travel from here to Australia, you would actually keep Shavuos and you stay there and you cross the date line in between Pesach and Shavuos, you keep Shavuos a day later, because Shavuos is not defined by the day on the calendar, it's defined by the journey through 50 days of time. It's individual. When we say it's individual, we mean it to the extent that you can literally keep Yom Tov on a different day to the other people in the same city. Now what this means is, or a takeaway here, is that every one of us has our own journey from the Homo sapiens animal that we started out as towards the ultimate best version of ourselves. And life is about a journey from the beginning to getting closer to that. And every one of us, our journey is unique. The things that we're working with are different. The things that we're working against are different. The things that we're working on are different. Our circumstances are different. Our strengths and weaknesses are different. Our challenges are different. And the journey is supposed to be different. It's supposed to be. If every one of us was supposed to have a journey that looked like everyone else's, Hashem would have created 8 billion clones. Hashem didn't create 8 billion clones. Every time someone's born, Hashem bothers to come up with a new genome, new fingerprints, a new mind, a new heart, new feelings, a completely unique person that's unique in all of those things. That's a lot of novelty every single time someone's born. The reason Hashem does that is because there are billions of different things that the world needs to be complete, that Hashem needs, Hashem wants, and each one of us has a specific role. A specific contribution to make that everyone else combined couldn't make, or we wouldn't be here. So, it's very easy and it's a very natural thing. It's natural to the human condition to look around and say, well, look where this person's up to in life, and well, that person doesn't have that challenge, etc. And it's like, you know what, that's true. And that's fine. The Torah says, your journey is your journey. Their journey doesn't matter. To the extent that if you are in Australia at a different point in your journey, you'll keep Shavuos at a different time, and that's exactly what you're supposed to do. That's what the halacha tells you to do. So there's anything that is a part of our journey is supposed to be, and that doesn't make it better or worse or anything else in contrast to anyone else's journey, because our journey is supposed to be unique. Another thing here that we see is that journey is a step-by-step process. There are 49 days of Spirit. Every day we count. Every day we name a different character trait. It seems like a little bit almost like silly as a metaphor, I think, but it actually makes the point because of how silly it is. If you have a plate of food, let's say someone wants to eat, there's a platter of grapes. You want to eat all the grapes on that platter? There's no such thing as eating the grapes. Well, you can eat the grapes, but there's no act of eating the grapes. There's no such thing as like you open your mouth and you put the grapes in and then they're gone. If you want to eat the grapes, you need to eat them. Maybe you could eat 3, 4, 5. You can stuff 6 at a time into your mouth if you want. You want to finish your plate of food at dinner. You take a bite, you eat it. You take another bite, you eat it. What did you do? You ate the food on the plate. But the only way to do that is doing it as a bite-by-bite process, one bite at a time. And it can be, it can feel very frustrating when we know we've got all these things to work on and all these things to do and all these things to achieve, and it's like, if I'm going to get through this list, it's going to take me my whole life. And it's like, you know what? That's exactly the point. That's exactly the plan. And it can feel frustrating, like, why can't I just do it all now? The fact is, you can't. Not because we're not good enough or not strong enough, it's because by definition, the mechanics of reality are that things happen one step at a time. We get to Shavuos by counting the Omer one day at a time. And part of this individuality is that the same way we can't compare, or it doesn't make sense to compare anything about our journey to anyone else's, it's our journey to make. It says, and you will count for yourselves, which means that if we want to make those changes in that development, we have to have the courage and the strength and find the motivation, if we don't have it naturally, to work on implementing those changes. No one else can make them for us. We can look to other people for support when necessary, and that's a good idea and a good thing to do, but ultimately, our journey depends on us taking whatever actions we need to take. And lastly, and this is in some ways, all of these points are really important, is there is no such thing. It's very easy also, and I think this is probably something that most or all people feel at some point. Some people feel it more frequently than others. It's just like, seriously, look at where I am. Look at what my life looks like. There's zero chance I'm ever being that person. I am never going to be able to bring my chametz into the Mishkan. And for a whole host of reasons, it's not an unreasonable mistake to make. Part of it is because of the emotional nature of the human condition, etc. But the fact that, probably most or all of us think that at least at some point is fine. But it's wrong. We started out of Egypt as the most animalistic versions of ourselves possible, to the extent that the Torah says, don't even bring wheat as a sacrifice. You're going to bring a sacrifice, use barley, use animal food. Bring a sacrifice that's appropriate for who and where you are, which is the most animalistic version of yourself possible. And even that, from that beginning, through the process of Sfiras HaOmer, through taking the things that need to be worked on one at a time, acknowledging, accepting, naming them, and then having the courage and the strength to put in the work, to work on them and make the changes necessary, even the most animalistic person possible can come to a point where we can bring our own personal chametz into the Mishkan, into the Beis HaMikdash, and offer it up to Hashem. And to be someone who is in a state of who is spiritually developed to a state that we can receive and internalize the infinity of Hashem inside of Torah. There's no such thing as being too far, as being too, let's say, quote-unquote, animalistic. And the energy of this message is, integrated through the power of a mitzvah into every single moment of this month. And it's a message that's important, you know, of utmost importance every moment of our lives. This month has a particular, unique koyach, a energy or a predisposition towards us being able to be uniquely successful in terms of maybe the ROI, how much progress we can make per unit of energy we put in. And this is the month of Iyar.